Hello, everyone, and welcome to Somewhere in Between. I'm your host, Naomi Loud, and today's topic is something that's been on my mind for quite a long time. And we are talking about the digital dark age. So, what is the digital dark age? You may ask. The digital dark age is something that's been around, the concept has been around for quite a long time. And it's the idea that because we are moving into a very highly digital world, we're already there. Um, we're gonna eventually lose a lot of historical data. We're gonna lose our archive because everything is gonna become unreadable. Um, for example, if you take, let's say, a floppy disk, which was what 20 years ago, it's useless to us now. You can't access the information. It's completely obsolete. And this is the first time in our history that this is a problem because basically for thousands of years at this point, we were able to access historical records with just looking with our eyes, right? It was because it was written on paper, it was carved into rock. I find this concept quite alarming. Maybe it's my love for anthropology, my love for history, but I've always been very highly aware of wanting to keep record of things, especially my creative process. And I was thinking about that earlier where I was like, it might come across as if I think I'm like super important and my art is super important and I must keep record because one day I'm going to be this like super famous person and people are going to want to see these old notes. And like a part of it maybe yeah, a little bit true, but also this is important for all of us. Like I'm like I need to be the spokesperson for analog at this point because we are all part of this historical moment. You know what I mean? We need to start creating our own archives or else um it's going to become it's going to become dire. So this episode is in a way a love letter to analog because speaking of, I didn't even do that on purpose, but you can see my DVDs and my CDs here. So let's talk about that for a second. Most of these are my husband's, actually. It's because it's as if he inherently understood that value and he's also a hoarder. But for like a hot sec, especially as millennials, where we were like witnessing this as we grew older, it was like, wow, you know, cassette to CDs, and then it's like VHS to DVDs, and then oh my god, Netflix all of a sudden was like a game changer, and then streaming sites and Spotify, and you didn't have to like download or you didn't have to like physically keep your music, and then bit by bit we stopped becoming the owner of that thing, right? And it was only I realized this a tad too late, because I moved out. I used to have a far like a good collection of DVDs, and um and then I moved about 3 years ago, and that was I think I have a few I never gave away my VHS. There was a few of them that I was like, I'm not giving those away. But for DVDs, I only kept the very special ones, which was like Constantine and like Queen of the Damned. Queen of the Damned was never going to be given away, but I gave away most of my collection. And then in the past year, I've realized how big of a mistake that was because I am now resorting back to DVDs because the streaming sites have become insane. Like I am not only did I all of a sudden realize, oh, I'm not the owner of anything. I do not own anything and we do not own anything, and that's a big problem. This is the first time in history that we don't own anything really. You know what I mean? Like we don't own the music we listen to, we don't own the movies, the blah blah blah. And like just that is alarming, but also like I've been starting to see that apparently the streaming sites have been doctoring certain movies where they're changing a few things. So if we don't have the original, then we never know what they're changing. You know what I mean? That's becoming a little bit conspiracy theory, but I do believe that. I do believe that they're slowly just changing everything. So I'm going to use a pretty extreme example to then link it back to streaming sites and why I went back to starting to collect DVDs. Um, I should have looked up the details before starting this, and I thought about it, didn't do it. But I know it's real because I learned this in school. But there was this one thing, Nestle. Okay, I used to boycott Nestle like crazy when I was a kid. Well, when I was younger because of this story, but ultimately, it's very hard to boycott Nestle because they own everything. But basically they did this thing where they went to Africa. I don't no longer remember the country, and they started supplying uh breastfeeding mothers with milk, with like powdered milk, or I can't remember if it was just milk or it was powdered milk or whatever, but it was like free, and everyone started using it because it was like also most likely convinced that it was like better for them, quote unquote. But when all the mothers became dependent on the breast milk because eventually they weren't breastfeeding their babies and their milk dried up, Nestle said, "Oh, well, now you have to pay for it." So that was like an evil way to make someone dependent on something to then make them pay, right? Guys, I need to say something. My mic stopped working midway, and I've spent the past like hour and a half figuring out why it wasn't working because everything seemed fine. Sorry. And it turns out it was muted. Turns out it just muted itself. I don't even know how I did that. So I feel like now I need to record half of what I already said, and I feel like I've lost all my juice. But let's do this. I can do this. If you're enjoying this podcast, there's a high chance you enjoy my other little creations. I am an author of 8 books, mostly romance. You can check them out on Amazon or on my website, naomiloud.com. I also have a snail mail subscription club called In Between Poetry Club, where I send you a poem every month, and I also create an illustration for it. And so I send you a print, and the poem is in the back. It's lovely. It's very whimsical, and I highly recommend you check it out. And also, this is a gentle reminder that if you do enjoy this podcast, to like, subscribe, share, review, whatever you want. Tell your best friend, tell your mom, tell a stranger in the street. As I was saying before I got rudely interrupted by my mic, literally, not me talking about the digital dark age, and my mic says, "Oh yeah, bitch, how about now?" So I was talking about evil corporations taking advantage of us. Uber did this too. They, for the first year or two, they were actually actively losing money because they were offering their rideshare so cheap. And then when everyone became dependent on it, they were like, "JK, we're raising the prices." And now everyone's dependent on the convenience. I I'm also a culprit of that, but honestly, when it is like extremely too expensive for like no reason, I do call it cab. And cabs are always cheaper. So, to come back to streaming sites, they have been doing the same thing because ultimately we didn't think we got caught up in the novelty of streaming and being able to access everything, and we started giving away our DVDs. I did it too. I gave away my DVDs. You know, streaming sites like Spotify, you start just giving away your CDs because you're like, well, I don't need this. Luckily, my husband is uh he is a prisoner of nostalgia, just like me, but he is he loves to just collect things, so he's kept his CDs. But we're now going back to DVDs also. And so streaming sites now, not only are they are we kind of stuck with them? Now we're paying a lot more. There's ads now. Like everything that made us flock to it is now like we're like kind of like we're imprisoned by the streaming sites, right? So my way of fighting back is to resort back to DVDs and try to collect as many as I can. Uh and also, not only is it because having physical things is a necessity, it's a way to fight back in this like world of everything not being tactile anymore. Is I've noticed that some old movies just don't exist anymore. They just you cannot find them on streaming sites, and then it makes so I tend to try to find all those old movies because it makes me like worry that they're just like one day gonna just disappear into the ether and no one's gonna remember them. And sometimes I'm like, I don't even care if this movie's kind of stupid. Like it's art that existed and all of a sudden it's just gonna disappear, you know? Versus like whereas like so much of like old literature and old music, classical music can be found again because it was written on paper. You know, the notes are there. So I find that it's our responsibility to create our own archive, become our own historian because this is very important. This is very important stuff. I was watching this show on Netflix called Hitmakers, and it's about these songwriters who go to these like song camps. They're like flown to certain places and they create songs together. They write songs for pop stars and whatnot. And I was struck by the fact that all of them were keeping their notes in their notes app. No one had a notebook, which I thought was so crazy to me because and it made me sad because I'm like, where's you're not keeping the process of writing this song. Like for me, like part of the joy of creating is also seeing the process of like where it came from. Like using a different word, scratching something out, just seeing the progress of where you're going and you know the muse talking to you. And like if you do it on your phone, you're just erasing a word and no one's going to know what you used before. And like I know that we can't just go back to analog completely. Hell, like I'm an author, like I'm not going to start writing longhand my books. So I do keep a progress notebook on the side when I write on my computer. And so at least there's some kind of physical proof that I was working on this. And it's interesting to me, like I am my own historian. It's interesting to me years later when you sort of forget what how you got there and then you find this notebook and you're like that was cool. It was like the other day I found one about me researching flowers for my book Was I Ever Here, you know? And it was just there's just I don't know, there's just whimsy to it that lacks when you just create on your phone that way. The other day I was talking to my friend about how well she told me about how people have been using AI to write poetry and it was like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard because I was like, poetry is the most human thing a human can do, honestly. It's like so human to write poetry. Like a computer will never understand the like subtleties of emotion that way, right? And so at first I was like, well, that's insane that people are like, trying to become poets with AI. And then at the same time, I was like, hey, listen, if there's one positive about the digital dark age and that eventually everything's just going to disappear, is that there's this beautiful promise that one day all of this AI slop is going to disappear. And what's going to be left is humans writing in their little notebooks and creating shitty little poetry or great poetry, who knows, No matter what the art is, if it's not only solely existing on our phones, it's going to last. you know? Much longer than you and I, not to be macabre, but, like, don't you wanna be part of the process of, like, in 200 years, like, humans are trying to, figure out, like, how were we and how we lived, and whatever digital computers exist now and software and whatever, then it might not even exist in 200 years. So like what's gonna uphold the test of time but a fucking notebook and paper. You know? So yeah, let's just all create our little archives. Let's all become our own little historians. And to come back to DVDs and streaming sites and stuff, it's also the fact that like I am old enough to remember going to the video store and perusing the aisle and deliberately choosing something and being so excited to come back home and then watch that one thing with no phone, no distractions, right? And we've lost that. And I'm really trying to get back to that because consuming just to consume is soulless in a way, right? Like why are we even doing that? What's the point of it but to just be distracted? Versus like art is created to be consumed and internalized and thought about and experienced, you know? It's not just a distraction. Even the silliest things isn't just a distraction. It's meant to make you feel no matter what it is. And so going back to DVDs, or it's also decision fatigue of like having 6 bajillion things to watch instead of maybe 5, you know? I'm trying to remember what I said the first time I recorded, but alas, I am but a human with a normal human brain and whatever. I said what I said, I guess. So that's that on Somewhere in Between, and I'll see you next time. Bye.